Have you ever felt that certain habits cling to your life like an invisible weight, holding you back from the peace and joy you deserve? As we age, these habits often go unnoticed, quietly stealing moments of happiness. But what if you could let them go and step into a life of true freedom? In this journey, we'll uncover 15 habits to leave behind for a peaceful life, each one a step towards serenity. Ready to discover the first habit? Let's dive in. 1. Judging others. I remember sitting with a group of friends at lunch one day, all of us talking about someone we hadn't seen in years. The conversation started light, but before long, it veered into judgmental territory. Comments about her choices, her appearance, her life. I stayed silent, but when I got home, I felt uneasy. Why had I let myself sit there, even if I hadn't contributed? The truth is, judging others often says more about us than it does about them. We all do it. It's almost reflexive sometimes, but it doesn't serve us. When we judge, we create a divide, distancing ourselves from the compassion and connection we crave. And here's the kicker: judgment rarely makes us feel better. It usually leaves us with a subtle, nagging discomfort. So what can we do? When I catch myself slipping into judgment now, I ask, what's driving this thought? Often, it's a reflection of my own insecurities or fears. I've learned to flip the script by finding one thing to admire about the person. She's always had such a kind heart. Or, she's so fearless in her decisions. It's a small mental shift, but it softens my perspective and leaves me feeling lighter. Next time you're tempted to judge, try this. Pause and redirect your thoughts to something positive. It's amazing how freeing it is to replace judgment with appreciation. 2. Judging yourself. Let me tell you about a moment that changed the way I see myself. A few years ago, I was getting ready for a family photo. I stood in front of the mirror, tugging at my clothes, criticizing every little thing. This dress shows my arms too much. My wrinkles look deeper today. My granddaughter walked in, saw me fussing, and said, "Grandma, you're so pretty." Her words stopped me in my tracks. Here I was, picking myself apart, while she saw nothing but love and beauty. It hit me. We are often our own harshest critics, focusing on flaws no one else notices. Judging yourself is exhausting. It drains your confidence and keeps you from seeing your worth. But here's the thing. You wouldn't speak to a friend the way you speak to yourself, would you? So why not treat yourself with the same kindness? I started a new habit after that day. Each morning, I look in the mirror and say one kind thing about myself, even if it feels silly. Your smile is warm. You have a spark in your eyes. Over time, those affirmations became louder than the criticism. If you're struggling with self-judgment, start small. Catch one critical thought and counter it with kindness. You deserve to speak to yourself the way a loved one would, with encouragement and care. 3. Judging life circumstances. Have you ever caught yourself comparing your life to someone else's? I used to do it all the time. One afternoon, I scrolled through photos of an old friend traveling through Europe with her family. Her life looked so glamorous. Picturesque vacations, elegant dinners, carefree smiles. Meanwhile, I was sitting at home in my worn-out slippers, feeling like I'd missed out on something. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the differences between her life and mine. But as I reflected, I realized I wasn't seeing the whole picture. Social media doesn't show the struggles, the mundane moments, or the sacrifices behind those smiles. And when I thought about my own life, my cozy evenings with family, the laughter we shared, I saw how rich it was in ways that truly mattered to me. Comparing circumstances is a trap. It blinds us to the beauty of our own journey. Life is not a competition. It's a series of unique paths, each with its own highs and lows. When you find yourself judging your circumstances, pause. Ask yourself, what am I grateful for today? Gratitude has a way of shifting focus back to the abundance in your life. Write it down if that helps. Soon you'll see that your life, complete with its imperfections, is filled with moments worth celebrating. Fourth, fear of change. I'll never forget the first time I declined an invitation to try something new because it felt too different. A few years ago, a friend asked if I'd like to join a painting class she was taking. I'm not an artist, I said, waving it off. Besides, I don't want to embarrass myself. But deep down, the idea intrigued me. For weeks afterward, I caught myself doodling on scraps of paper and wondering what it would have been like. Change can feel intimidating, especially as we grow older and get used to routines that bring us comfort. It's easy to stick to the familiar and convince ourselves that new experiences are unnecessary. But the truth is, change is what keeps us growing. It opens doors to fresh perspectives, relationships, and even talents we never knew we had. When I finally signed up for a different class, this time, writing, it felt like breaking through a self-imposed wall. I wasn't perfect, but that wasn't the point. It was about discovering joy in the process, not just the outcome. If the idea of change makes you hesitate, start small. Pick one thing that intrigues you: a new recipe, a short walk in a different neighborhood, or even switching up your morning routine. Each small step can remind you that life still has surprises waiting for you. And those surprises, they're worth the leap. 5. Holding on to regrets. When I think of regret, one moment always stands out. Years ago, I passed up an opportunity to take a once-in-a-lifetime trip with a dear friend. It's not the right time, I told her, making excuses about money and schedules. When she passed away unexpectedly a year later, that missed trip weighed on me like a stone. Regret can feel like a heavy shadow that follows you everywhere. It whispers, "What if?" and "if only," keeping your mind tethered to a past you can't change. For years, I replayed that decision, wishing I could go back and say yes. But over time, I realized something important. Regret isn't a punishment. It's a teacher. The pain of that missed moment taught me to say yes more often. It reminded me that time is precious and to prioritize experiences over hesitation. It also helped me forgive myself. We're all doing the best we can with the information and resources we have at the time. If regret is holding you back, try reframing it. Instead of seeing it as a failure, view it as a lesson. What can you learn from that experience? And how can you use that knowledge to make better choices now? Let go of the past, because the present is calling, and it's far more beautiful than any what if. 6. Fear of being vulnerable. A few years ago, my daughter asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, what's something you've struggled with lately?" At first, I wanted to brush it off with a lighthearted answer, but something in her tone made me pause. Instead of deflecting, I told her the truth. I was feeling uncertain about some health changes and didn't know how to process them. To my surprise, her response wasn't pity. It was love. "Thank you for sharing that," she said, hugging me. That conversation marked a turning point. For so long, I had equated vulnerability with weakness, but in reality, it was a bridge that brought us closer. Being vulnerable doesn't come easily to many of us. We've spent decades building strength, facing challenges, and carrying responsibilities. Opening up can feel like undoing all of that. But here's the truth. Vulnerability isn't about falling apart. It's about letting others see the humanity in you, the same way you see it in them. If you're afraid of vulnerability, start with someone you trust. Share a small thought or feeling, something that feels manageable. Watch how they respond, and notice how it feels to let someone in. you may find that the very thing you feared, judgment or rejection, was just an illusion. What you'll likely receive instead is understanding, connection, and even a sense of relief. 7. People-pleasing. I used to be the kind of person who couldn't say no. Bake sales, volunteer events, family favors, you name it. I was there, even when I didn't want to be. One evening, after a long day, my neighbor knocked on the door asking if I could help prepare for a community potluck. My body was begging for rest, but I smiled and said, "Of course." That night, I found myself in the kitchen at midnight, exhausted and frustrated, not at her, but at myself. People-pleasing feels like kindness, but it often comes at a personal cost. Saying yes to everyone else can mean saying no to yourself. It took me years to learn that it's okay to prioritize my own well-being, even if it means disappointing someone else. Now, before I agree to anything, I pause and ask myself, do I genuinely want to do this? If the answer is no, I've learned to respond kindly but firmly. I wish I could help, but I have other commitments. It's a small phrase, but it's been a game changer for my energy and peace. If you struggle with people-pleasing, remember this: your time and energy are precious. Protecting them doesn't make you selfish, it makes you wise. Start with small boundaries and watch how liberating it feels to honor your own needs. 8. Neglecting self-care. I used to think self-care was a luxury. Between work, family, and everything in between, there was always something more important to focus on. One weekend, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the tired woman staring back. That moment was a wake-up call. I realized I'd spent so much time taking care of others that I'd completely neglected myself. Self-care isn't about indulgence. It's about preservation. It's how we refill our cups so we can pour into others without running dry. For me, self-care started with small steps. I began setting aside 30 minutes every morning to do something that nourished me, whether it was stretching, journaling, or simply enjoying a cup of tea in silence. What I noticed was profound. Those small moments made me feel more grounded and energized, which spilled over into every part of my life. I had more patience, more clarity, and even more joy. If you're putting yourself last, I encourage you to start small. Pick one thing, just one, that brings you comfort or happiness, and make it a non-negotiable part of your day. You'll be amazed at how even the smallest acts of self-care can transform the way you feel. 9. Holding grudges. I once carried a grudge for years, and it felt like dragging around a heavy suitcase everywhere I went. The person who had wronged me had moved on with their life, but I was stuck, replaying the hurt over and over in my mind. It wasn't until a dear friend said something that shifted my perspective. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. That hit me hard. I realized the grudge wasn't punishing them, it was punishing me. Letting it go didn't mean condoning what happened. It meant freeing myself from the pain of reliving it. One evening, I wrote a letter to that person, not to send, but to release my feelings. I poured out all the hurt, anger, and frustration. When I finished, I tore it up and felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. If you're holding on to a grudge, consider this. Forgiveness isn't about them, it's about you. It's about reclaiming your peace and moving forward without the burden of resentment. Start with one step, like journaling or talking it through with someone you trust. You deserve the freedom that comes with letting go. 10. Thinking, it's too late. I used to tell myself, it's too late for that. Too late to learn piano. Too late to travel to that dream destination. Too late to start something new. But then, I met Carol. Carol was 72 when she decided to take up painting. She didn't worry about being a beginner or whether she'd be any good. She just bought some supplies and started. The first time I saw her work, I asked, "How long have you been painting?" She laughed and said, "About 6 months." I couldn't believe it. Her work was full of life and energy, and you could see the joy it brought her. "I figured," she said, "if I'm still here, it's not too late to try." That conversation stayed with me. It challenged every excuse I'd been making. The truth is, the only thing standing in the way of trying something new is the story we tell ourselves. "It's too late" is just another way of saying, "I'm afraid." If this resonates, take a moment to ask yourself, what's one thing I've always wanted to do? Then, take a small step toward it. Sign up for that class, book that trip, or open that book you've always wanted to write. You're still here, and that means the possibilities are endless. 11. Comparing yourself to others. There was a time when I couldn't scroll through social media without feeling a pang of inadequacy. I'd see someone's perfect vacation or a photo of their family all dressed up for the holidays, and I'd think, why doesn't my life look like that? It was exhausting, and worse, it was stealing my joy. One day, I decided to take a break from social media. During that time, I started journaling about my own life, moments I was proud of, memories that made me smile, small things that brought me happiness each day. What I discovered was profound. My life was full, but I hadn't been paying attention to it. Comparisons have a way of magnifying what we think we're missing while completely ignoring what we have. And the truth is, no one's life is perfect, not even the ones that look flawless online. If you catch yourself falling into the comparison trap, try this. For every comparison you make, write down something you love about your own life. Over time, you'll see that your journey is uniquely beautiful, filled with moments that are just as worthy of celebration as anyone else's. 12th, negative self-talk. Years ago, I caught myself saying something out loud that shocked me. "I'm so stupid." I had made a small mistake, something inconsequential, but my reaction was so harsh. My granddaughter overheard and immediately said, "You're not stupid, Grandma." Her words stopped me in my tracks. If she thought I wasn't stupid, why was I so quick to tell myself otherwise? That moment made me realize how deeply ingrained my negative self-talk had become. For years, I had been my own worst critic, pointing out every flaw and minimizing every accomplishment. I wouldn't speak to a friend that way, so why was I speaking to myself like that? Changing this habit wasn't easy, but I started small. Every time I caught a negative thought, I countered it with a positive one. "I can't believe I messed that up" became, "I'll do better next time." Over time, those positive thoughts grew louder, and the negative ones faded into the background. If you struggle with self-talk, try writing down 3 things you like about yourself every morning. It might feel awkward at first, but it's a powerful way to remind yourself of your worth. Remember, the words you say to yourself matter just as much, if not more, than the words you say to others. 13. Living in the past. A few years ago, I found an old box of photos tucked away in the attic. As I flipped through them, I felt a bittersweet pang. There were images of me as a young woman, my children when they were small, and family gatherings that seemed like a lifetime ago. For days after, I found myself longing for those moments, wishing I could go back and relive them. That nostalgia was comforting at first, but then it became heavy. I started comparing my present to the past and feeling like nothing could measure up. But life isn't meant to be lived in reverse. Holding on to the past was keeping me from noticing the beauty of today. I decided to reframe my relationship with those memories. Instead of seeing them as a reminder of what's gone, I started treating them as treasures to be celebrated. I began journaling about the gratitude I felt for those moments and how they shaped who I am today. If you find yourself clinging to the past, ask yourself, What can I appreciate about this moment right now? Look for the small joys. A sunrise, a cup of tea, a phone call with a loved one. Life is still unfolding, and it's full of new memories waiting to be made. 14. Overthinking. I've always had a tendency to overthink. One time, I spent hours agonizing over whether I'd said the wrong thing to a friend during lunch. I replayed the conversation in my mind, analyzing every word until I finally worked up the courage to call her. "I'm so sorry if I upset you earlier," I said nervously. Her response, "Upset me? I don't even remember what we were talking about." That moment was eye-opening. While I was tied up in knots, she had moved on without a second thought. Overthinking has a way of blowing things out of proportion and stealing peace from the present. To counter this, I've developed a simple trick. When I catch myself spiraling, I ask, "Will this matter a year from now?" Most of the time, the answer is no. I also practice grounding techniques, like taking deep breaths or focusing on the sensations around me. It brings me back to the present and helps quiet my mind. If overthinking is something you struggle with, try creating a worry window, a set time each day to think about your concerns. Outside of that window, gently remind yourself to let it go. You'll find that most worries aren't worth the mental energy they demand. 15. Trying to control everything. I used to think I had to be in charge of everything. Plans, decisions, outcomes. It wasn't until a family vacation went completely off script that I realized how exhausting it was to carry that responsibility. We had planned a day at the beach, but a sudden storm forced us to stay indoors. At first, I was frustrated, convinced the day was ruined. But then, my grandson suggested we play board games, and before I knew it, we were laughing harder than we had in ages. That day taught me something important. Trying to control everything doesn't leave room for life's unexpected joys. When we let go of the need to manage every detail, we create space for spontaneity, creativity, and even relaxation. Now, when things don't go as planned, I remind myself that flexibility often leads to the best memories. Instead of focusing on what went wrong, I ask, what can I do with what's in front of me? If you find yourself clinging to control, start small. Let someone else choose the restaurant for dinner or pick the movie for the evening. You'll find that releasing control doesn't mean losing it. It means gaining freedom. You've just unlocked 15 ways to lighten your life and make space for joy. Proof that it's never too late to grow and thrive. You're beautiful, resilient, and more than enough. Share your favorite takeaway in the comments, and let's inspire each other. Don't forget to subscribe. Next time, we're diving into self-care secrets you'll love.